Morning, everyone. My name's Korte. I'm alcoholic. I was a member of this group for a long time, like 14 years. I love this group. Dan, is that you? Holy smokes. There's some people I haven't seen in like 7 or 8 years kicking around. It's really nice to see some of you characters again. Not all of you, but some of you. I'm kidding. My sponsor, I feel like I had a great sponsor who initially took me through the big book. I met him in one of these meetings in Braintree, and he really, sometimes I think we kind of slide over step 8 and get right to 9, but he was really thorough with me on step 8 and really becoming willing and because honestly I wasn't willing to make amends to a lot of these people when I finished my 4th and 5th step, and I got through 6 and 7. I was still, afraid of a lot of these amends, and I got jammed up a number of times, and one point early on, I was so terrified of the amends. I put 3 names in a hat, and I prayed, and I pulled one out, and I was like, okay, no matter who's on this list, I'm gonna call whoever this person is. And it was really funny. I can't remember the order that I picked them out, but I picked up and I called and tried to make an appointment, and I got a machine. They weren't there. And then I picked up the second one and they weren't available. And I was like, oh man, this is getting worse. So I finally picked up the third one I was most afraid of. It was this woman was a mother of someone I had dated in college. I was just out of college, and she was an RA in her building and was like an honest student. And literally after a month with me, she almost failed out of school and was suicidal. And I had known that she was coming off a really bad breakup, and I had been I've been very manipulative and, selfish and inconsiderate. So, her mother had threatened to have my legs broken, and, perhaps rightfully so. And so I got down to call her up, and, she answered the phone, which I wanted the machine so bad. And I had just enough willingness to make the call, and she answered the phone, and this woman hated my guts, but she was really kind to me. She knew I was an alcoholic. The first day I had met her, I was like, a bunch of my friends pulled up. Well, I didn't technically meet her this day, but we dropped this girl off, and I was singing like "You Are My Shining Star" on the lawn or something stupid. And the mother said, "Who is that guy?" And she knew, I ended up dating her, and she knew before she even met me that I was an alcoholic. I didn't know it yet really, but she knew. And she was just very kind to me on the phone, and as it turned out, her husband had been an alcoholic. She was a black belt in Al-Anon, and she knew the story. She knew the story, and her daughter was one of the people I felt like was really my most egregious. There was a worse relationship. Faux pas is not a word that I can use here. There's a worse debacle than this, but this girl I felt was a really sweet, kind, innocent person who I had been like deliberately deceptive to. That wasn't really my modus operandi most of the time, but I've kind of been willfully dishonest, and it almost cost her a life. So I felt really strong about this, and now I'm like a gunslinger, and I'm through the process, man. Now I can do all these, and I wanted to do that amends, and and I remember some really sage advice from other people. I remember this guy in a men's group I used to go to in Somerville, who he never made like broad sweeping statements. But he made this broad sweeping statement, and he says, "It is a fool who does amends without talking to somebody." I'm like, well, yeah, but it's between me and God, right? Yeah, but, there might be your filter might be a little messed up. You want to talk to somebody about this. So I was like, okay. So I asked this woman's mother if she would, give me this woman's phone number so I could make amends to her. She said, "I don't know about that. I don't know if that's such a good idea." And she left it at that. And I thought she had refused to pass on the information. So a little while later, I tried to get around her. I sent a letter, and nothing came of that. Tried to contact her. So years go by. This is when I'm like 2 years sober. So something like, oh my gosh, 14 years goes by. It's a couple of years ago. And I'm able to find this. I go on Facebook for the express purpose of finding people I couldn't yet find to make amends, maybe a few years ago. Well, lo and behold, she pops up and messages me. So I'm like, oh, well, maybe, actually, that's not true. I found her, and by reading, her page is public or something. By reading it, I could deduce that something had happened with her husband of 12 years, and he had left, and it seemed like there was infidelity or something painful. So, remembering what that guy from Somerville said, I called my friend, and I have when you're around in AA for a while, hopefully you develop different friendships with different folks. And if I have a 10-step, there's a lot of different people I can call. There's certain people I call when I want to stay right and sick. There's certain people I call, and at some level below the surface, I even do this subconsciously. Like my best friend in AA is solid. She is, rock. But I can still get a fastball by because I don't even know that I'm putting some sort of foreign substance on the ball when I'm throwing it, because some subconscious part of me wants to stay right more than it wants to be free, and this is a never-ending battle. I think of Paul in the last letter he wrote, St. Paul. The very last letter he wrote after decades of trying to be godly and turning himself over, he wrote, "Geez, why do I do the things I hate? And I don't do the things I want to do, but I do the things I hate." Still, he was doing it. So I suppose I'm probably susceptible to that as well. And I still, have that undercurrent of dishonesty that sometimes. So anyway, I remembered my friend from that Friday night meeting, and I called up a woman, and when I would do an amends with a person I was in a relationship with, I learned to talk to a woman because my grand sponsor used to say you don't want to inflict an amends on anyone. I'm free. I felt so good to get that out, and now someone's jumping off a bridge. Sometimes I have to eat some of this stuff just because I can talk about it. Other people maybe haven't had a spiritual awakening, and other people maybe they don't need to hear all this stuff. So I always bounce things off people, and when it's an amends like that, I talked to this woman friend of mine, who's one of my best friends in AA, and I got 2 sentences in, and she says, "Absolutely not." So I was like, okay, that's good enough for me. I'm willing, And 6 months later, that woman sent me a message. "Hey, I saw you on Facebook. How you doing?" And I said, okay, good. And I sent her a message back because now I'm ready. I'm ready. Now this happened 20 years ago, 20 years ago. But I'm ready to get this stuff off and clear and blah, blah. So I sent her a preemptive strike. I sent her a preemptive email "Hey, is it okay? I'm sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. Is it okay if I send you, a letter talking about, an amends letter?" And she sends me back, "You know what? I don't think so. No thanks." She's like, "I remember you as being funny and kind of an asshole. But funny, and I just want to remember you that way. I want to remember it that way." And it's and I guess the the sane person in me is like, oh, well, good, she doesn't need to suffer anymore at my hands. But part of me it was some weird thing. I want to check this off in full, and if I don't, inflict this on her, then so I said, okay, and I had kind of made a entry amends of but no, I hadn't covered any details. And she sends me a letter back, and she says, thank you. You reminded, her mother had since died. Her father was already dead when I met her. He was an alcoholic and had died a younger death. And she said, thank you for reminding me how wonderful my mother was. And she remembered that her mother had asked her if she wanted an amends from me 12 years before. And said, geez, I heard from that guy Court. It seems like he's sober and doing amends, and would that benefit you? Do you think you'd like to hear from him? She didn't put it like I asked. She was in her own spiritual program, living her own process, and she, as a black belt in Al-Anon, knew the score and knew how to present it, and she gave her daughter the opportunity. She didn't want to do it, and she protected her. And, so sometimes I get an idea of what the amends is going to look like and what's going to be accomplished by the amends and what a successful amends would look like. And the reality is I don't have any idea about any of those things. My job is to just do the next right thing, and I proceed with more caution than I used to. I used to go in kind of, blazing, my amends are done now, except for, they've been done for a long time, except for people I can't locate. And, but if I do have one, I really think a lot more about potential effects on the other person, Some amends, this woman who went out with my best friend in college. I had always been kind of, she was sort of like, I don't know, her favorite movies were like Spirit of St. Louis, all these 50s romance, Nikki Nice. She never swore, she was like a good little Catholic girl, and I used to go out of my way to be outrageous, and she'd be over, I'd come out with no pants, just being an idiot for shock value, because I know she was sort of a very reserved person. So that's what I thought I was making amends for. So I met with her and I made amends, for that. And she said, oh, I just thought you were going for shock value. That didn't bother me. I'm like, really? And she says, no, you know what really hurt me? And because I had asked her, I was told at the end to say, hey, is there anything I left out? And I said, she goes, well, none of those things bothered me, but what really hurt me was blah, blah, blah. And the amends, what the real amends that day was that I listened to her. I just listened to her. She said, I felt like you really listened to me today, and that you actually cared what I thought and what I said and what what your effect on my life was. And I never felt like that. And I used to call her up all the time after they broke up, thinking I was cheering her up. I'd call her up, I'd be funny for 10 minutes, and then I'd hang up. And that actually upset her for some reason. She took that as me tormenting her or something. In my best efforts, I was trying to be a friend and cheer her up. I thought she was a nice person, but I never was able to listen. So even in my attempts to be kind, I was sort of inflicting myself on her. So just listening that day and finding of all and I did a lot of stupid stuff to this person, and none of it really had any lasting effect except the fact that I seemed like I didn't care because I never listened to her. There was some financial amends I was afraid of. I worked at a store that I didn't really consider it stealing, but I took a 12-pack every Wednesday. I managed a liquor store. I took a 12-pack every Wednesday and on a Friday, and I thought that was just kind of, part of the job. And well, you do that, occasionally I would ring up a $3 bottle. This is a long time ago, 20, 25 years ago. I'd ring up a $3 bottle return and buy a sub next door. And, the guy at the other store was really robbing the guy. So I didn't feel like that was bad, that was really that bad by comparison. So you add it up, and this is thousands of dollars. I worked there for a long time. I did this like 5 years, and I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, I don't have the money. And I thought, what I wanted to do was save up this money and ride in like a conquering hero and be like, here's all this money that I owe you, and blah, blah, blah. But I knew I would never make the amend. And that amend would have been tainted with just like self-glorification. So I knew I would never make the amend, and I think my sponsor suggested that I approach this guy and say, like, this seems like one that you should start taking care of. Why don't you approach this guy and work out a payment plan? And I'm like, like everybody, like that's lame, I don't want to do that. And the funny thing is, my resentments against this guy came back, and some part of my subconscious or whatever was manufacturing reasons why I didn't have to make this amend to this guy now. He ran the businesses with dishonest. He ended up bilking, Anheuser-Busch and Miller out of, he didn't end up paying a lot of these guys. Blah, blah, blah. And, my sponsor was just really clear in a way, like he never told me what to do, but he would just very gently state the truth. And he'd be like, yeah, but you didn't technically rob Anheuser-Busch or Miller. You robbed this guy. It's like, whether he robbed somebody else or whatever, that's not really the issue at hand. And I just put it in kind of plain. I'm like, this guy, and he cheated on his wife, and he, and all this other stuff that has nothing to do with anything. And in my mind, like, I made this guy a much worse person than he was. So finally, I was like, all right. So I tracked him down. Both those businesses were out of business, and I tracked him down. And when I found this guy, he was living on a couch. He was, sleeping on one of his old friend's couch. This guy, like, paid cash for his house when I knew him. He was loaded with money, owned, like, half a strip joint, and he was, had tons of money. And he had lost all that, he was this big, heavy guy, and he had this gorgeous little wife, and I was so resentful at him because he had a silver spoon in his mouth when he was born, this lucky jerk, and blah, blah. And, he lost that wife, and that wife was kind of psychotic on top of it. And when I saw this guy and made amends to him, he was very kind to me, very forgiving. He wanted me to give him information about the other manager, which I wouldn't do. No, because I said, this is my amends, I can't really involve. And he goes, that guy really destroyed the businesses, not you. And I was like, I'm like, well, I don't know about that. I did know about that, but I'm like, well, I can't really, what is it, Frank, the guy in House of Cards says, Frank, he says, well, you may very well believe that, but I couldn't possibly comment, that kind of thing. I was like, yeah, I can't really comment about that, but I'd like to clean up my side of the street. And I had to, send this guy a check every month for, oh my gosh, it was like a year and a half or 20 months. And I finally, I gave him a down payment and then paid him. And I finally paid it off. And that was my biggest financial amends I really didn't want to make. And in my experience of sponsorship since going through, those are the ones that always seem to trip a lot of people up. As a guy used to say, getting up off the cash. And there's all kinds of reasons why, geez, I really don't need to make this. Well, I got that settlement fair and square. The court said I deserved it. Yeah, but you lied. This isn't even true. Blah, 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 blah. And I've lost some sponsees that way. And part of my own amends, another way I look at it is, to amend is to change. And there was a great woman who used to come to this meeting the first couple of years we started, and then she moved away. She was a powerhouse in these styles of meetings. And one of the ways she understood amends was to take out the lie and put in the truth. Some of the relationships that were damaged, there maybe wasn't a specific direct amends, which is what I've been talking about, where I go take a direct, specific action. But it might be the relationship was somehow tainted with some dishonesty, some jealousy that's not as tangible, but there's something there. So to go back and to take out the flaw or the character defect or the manifestation of unhealth and put in truth, to put in spiritual truth, a spiritual principle, put in love, etc. I forgot why I was going in that direction. But that's been one way I've looked at amends, to amend my own relationships with people. And looking back, I think if I could do it differently, I would do sponsorship a little differently in some of those circumstances where I was sort of maybe a little too black and white, and maybe a little too willing to enforce my own morals and principles on what somebody else should be doing, instead of letting them have their own journey. And as I've gone forward on my spiritual path, I look at sponsorship a lot differently. And part of that is my own amends to those early people I sponsored, just like I make amends to God and to some of the women that I inflicted myself on in early relationships who I can't make direct amends to, or I don't know, etc., by the way that I act with my wife and the way I handle my relationship with my wife. I still notice that I'm still my sort of default tendency, and not to put myself down, I'm just a human being. I'm actually a wonderful guy, but I'm just a human being. And, my default is still like selfish, because I'm kind of a lazy person. And this is part of an ongoing amends. Yesterday, I had a lot of studying to do, way behind in my work, and my wife, she has a lot of allergies, and we have all these annoying HEPA filters all over the house, and they're just running constantly and on high, and they get dusty a lot. And I'm supposed to clean these things, and I don't know what it is, but I don't want a house. I just want to live on the lake over here in Shrewsbury, where I used to live, in my one-room apartment, and then I lived upstairs too. That's plenty for me. And a landlord will come fix stuff. I have no interest in being like a homeowner, but my wife's like an adult. So, she had this house when I met her, and so anyway, it's just a lot of work that I don't want to do. So these filters, I'm vacuuming yesterday, and I'm kind of semi-resentful. I'm well, she's actually working for a living. I'm home vacuuming, and I realized, I had to clean the pellet stove, and I'm like, you know what I should do? Well, I got the vacuum out. I should go and clean all these friggin' filters I hate. And then I think about it, and I'm like, I don't have to do that. Nobody's gonna know about that. I don't have to. And then I think, even if it just makes her breathing just a little bit better, isn't that an important enough? Really, what kind of a selfish bastard is I don't want to have to vacuum these filters so my wife can breathe? Isn't it time to check my email yet? Well, why am I doing this? She's not going to appreciate it because she's an adult. She doesn't appreciate it when other adults act like adults. She expects, now to say hey, clean the bathroom. Yeah, and? Yeah, what? What do you... Why are you telling me this? So, part of my amends is to not work into casual conversation the chores I've done during the day. Speaking of Al Pacino, I clean the garage. Stuff like that. So this is all it sounds kind of like behavior modification, but I really have to pray to do these things, because it's just not in my nature to want to do these things. But that's an ongoing amendment, the way that I treat my wife. There's still a lot of just obliviousness, selfishness, when something will happen, my instinct will be to fall back and defend what I've done, my position. That's my natural inclination. And I can look at, like, basically, she's a very sane person. But, there's a couple of minor things that would seem minor to me that really set her off. And I'm like, that's not rational that you would react that way to this thing. That's not a big deal. And I could sell that to anybody. If I called up to do a 10-step about that, virtually anyone I know would probably, sort of get me to a half-assed turnaround. I could kind of look at, a little bit, but I'd be able to keep alive the BS story that this is her being irrational, which it may or may not be, but that's not really what the point is. The point is that now I have to be conscious of it. I have to challenge myself to say, okay, this woman for some unknown reason wants you home. And, I would make plans to do something during a time that we would be home. And I'd be thinking, well, we're not doing anything. We're just, you're not even going to talk to me. You're going to read over there, and I'm going to be sitting 4 feet away. Why is it important that I'm there? Well, I don't know, but it is. That's what being married means to her. You're home, you're there, and we read together. This is an activity for her. This is like, not an activity for me, but it's an activity. So if I make a plan to do something during times I'm supposed to be home, it really upsets her. Not much upsets this woman. So I've got to pay attention, whether I think it's irrational or not. I have to pay attention instead of being, self-centered, like, well, I can justify my actions here. I have to try to be other-centered. Now, I got to be honest with you. Saturday morning is a time that we spend together. And I don't make plans anymore during those times unless I ask first, and I really try not to do it because her interpretation is, you'd rather do this other thing, and this is our time. Can't you do it during some other time? So I thought long and hard about coming to the meeting today, and I wrestled with it, and somehow I sort of slipped back into my old thinking, and I said, what, I have to say yes. I haven't been, I'm in school, and I haven't been as active in AA, and I'm like, what, the right thing to do is to show up and to speak at this thing. And I made that decision without consulting her, yet again. And then I realized it, and I was like, oh, honey, and I sort of made a 10-step amends using what I'd learned when I made my initial amends. Like, what, this is what I did, and that was wrong. I should have talked to you first, and I was so caught up in my ethics of whether or not I should go do this, and I completely forgot that I was actually married to you, and that I should have talked to you first about this. So it's an ongoing thing to me, and for me, the bread and butter is the direct amends really important, but the bread and butter to me is the living amends, how I live these amends out. I think of my father, and my direct amends to him meant absolutely nothing to him. I'm sure he wouldn't have remembered it a week after it happened. I don't know what you're talking about. You're a good kid, and this stuff. But the living amends, when I was drinking, I really wasn't part of my family. I was only, an hour away or less than an hour away, but I wasn't very participatory in my family. I didn't want much to do with them, and sort of in and out. And the last 15 years of my father's life, like I took him, or I met him at a movie every week for 15 years, and I began to be part of his life and go visit him in Maine for weeks at a time when he was up there by himself, escaping from my stepmother. And as time went on, like I had built that relationship up. In his last few years, he was, he needed a lot of help, and I was able to be his healthcare proxy, and then be like a primary caregiver for him for the last couple of years, and change his stuff that he used to have to go to the hospital for, and he was there for him, and my father was like a pseudo World War II tough guy who, didn't want it. He had all the answers. He didn't want any help. He didn't want to. And here he is. He's got to be bathed by his baby son. I'm the youngest of 8. So it's humiliating for him. And the steps really allowed me to make that amends. The spiritual awakening allowed me to not take it personally that he hated me at times for bathing him and shaving him, and I could understand that. And, by God-given humor really allowed him to have a lot more dignity in the end, and we would joke about it. He would be really miserable about the showers and stuff. And I'd be like, yeah, this is my dream, Dad. This is really culminated for me. I mean, can I watch that again? That was awesome for me. That was great. And he was able to kind of laugh about it and be like, yeah, okay, I get, and it added a lot of joy to his life, even though he had lost so much. He couldn't eat anymore. He couldn't drink coffee. He couldn't do anything. And it was awesome to be able to be there. That's probably the most important amends I've made. And the direct amends was nothing. It was meaningless to him. But the living amends was everything, and my living amends with my father actually was a living amends to my stepmother. Made her life a lot easier. And, I hated this woman. And my direct amends with her, again, she didn't, I don't remember it that way. I really hated her for a long time. And my living amends of showing up and being part of this family, when she was dying and on hospice, her own kids didn't know how to deal with it. They didn't know how to comfort her. They didn't, they couldn't do anything. And she kept asking for me, which shocked me, and she, and I honestly, I can't say I ever loved the woman. I forgave her, and I knew who she, I accepted who she was, and she was doing her best. And I'm not saying it in that, fake way, like, yeah, they're doing the best they can. When I'm like, yeah, do I really believe that? I don't know, probably not. But she was doing the best she could. She really was. And, in the end, she adored me for taking care of my father and then for showing up for her. And I can't say I had love in my heart for her, but God allowed me to show up and be a son anyway. And God's love flowed through me into this woman because I didn't really have any for her. And, that's okay too, it's not like I'm going to be rendered perfect now. So I don't know. I just keep trying to grow in understanding and effectiveness, and the way I mostly think about the amends that are currently going on in my life, and I never think about the steps individually anymore, like step 1, step 4. It all kind of just enfolded and woven into a way of life for me, where I just kind of instinctively think a different way from the spiritual awakening that I've had here. I don't break it down very often, but I think of my whole life as kind of an amends to God and to myself. I never wanted to be who I was. I wanted to be, bigger and, linebacker on the team, some nonsense like that. I wanted to be different. And to find out who I am is the goal of the rest of my life. And to be willing to live into that, and it's sort of my amends to God. So instead of being resentful at God for who He made, for who God made me, I could be grateful to God for who God made me. And by the way, I don't know who this guy is yet. Can you continue to unfold that and show me? And ongoing amends include the way I sponsor people, the way I think about spiritual development and recovery, and trying to, weave a lot of different things into my life and just continue to grow up. Because I'm still, for me, as I've said a lot of times in this room, compared to me, I'm on fire. I don't know if I'm well compared to me. I don't know about anybody else, but I still have a lot of immaturity in a lot of different areas that still need to be amended and changed. So thanks so much for letting me come out and spend the morning with you guys. Thanks.